18 rounds remaining. Total, not per rifle, not per section. 18 rounds of 7.62 mm ammunition distributed across an entire company position on Hill 4179, Korea, April 1951. The Chinese counterattack coming up the southern slope numbered approximately 2,400 men. The mathematics were not theoretical. They were immediate. 47 Rajput infantrymen holding a trench line 180 meters wide with no fire support, no reinforcement, and 18 bullets between them and annihilation. An American liaison officer, Captain Robert Hendricks, 3rd Infantry Division, watched from an adjacent ridge 400 meters east. He had spent the previous 3 hours attempting to convince his battalion commander that the Indian detachment looked like extras from a historical reenactment. The mustaches, the battle cries, the traditional curved blades some of them carried alongside their rifles. Hendricks had used the phrase medieval fare twice in radio traffic. His colonel had laughed. At 0347 hours, the Chinese reached a distance of 60 meters from the Rajput position. The last controlled volley from the trench line dropped 11 attackers. Then, silence. Empty magazines. The sound Hendricks heard next, carried across the valley on cold air, made him reach for his field telephone. Not to call fire support, to warn his own men what was about to happen. Because the Rajputs fixed bayonets and charged. The distance between Hendricks' observation post and the Rajput trench was precisely 387 meters according to survey maps filed 3 days after the engagement. Close enough to see individual soldiers through 7x50 binoculars. Close enough to hear the battle cry that preceded the charge. Close enough to watch 47 men violate every principle of modern infantry doctrine and survive. Hendricks had graduated West Point in 1949. He had studied Clausewitz, Mahan, and Fuller. He had read every field manual published by the United States Army between 1945 and 1950. Nothing in his education had prepared him for what he witnessed in the 6 minutes that followed. The Rajput Regiment traces its lineage to 1778, not as legend, as documented military formation under the British East India Company. 21 Victoria Crosses awarded between 1857 and 1945. 43 battle honors spanning campaigns from Burma to North Africa. The regiment's operational culture was not built on mysticism or romantic nationalism, but on a specific doctrinal philosophy: controlled aggression as a tactical instrument. The British Indian Army had spent 170 years systematically weaponizing regional warrior traditions into standardized infantry capability. The Rajputs were the result of that process applied to Rajasthan's martial clans. The transformation was deliberate. British officers in the 19th century had identified specific communities across India whose social structures emphasized martial identity, physical conditioning, and codes of honor that could be adapted to military discipline. The Rajputs of Rajasthan, Hindu warrior clans with genealogies tracing back to the 6th century, represented ideal recruiting ground, not because they were inherently superior fighters, but because their existing social organization could be channeled into regimental structure with minimal friction. The training regime developed between 1778 and 1900 combined British drill with indigenous combat traditions. Bayonet training borrowed from European practice, but incorporated close-quarters techniques from traditional Rajput swordsmanship. Physical conditioning emphasized endurance rather than bulk, long marches under load, sustained combat drills, and acclimatization to extreme temperatures. Mental conditioning focused on unit cohesion reinforced through regimental identity symbols. The mustache as visible marker of belonging, the turban as identification of subunit, the battle cry as psychological trigger. By 1947, when India gained independence and the British Indian Army was partitioned between India and Pakistan, the Rajput Regiment had become a fully institutionalized fighting force. The doctrine remained intact. The training pipeline remained unchanged. The regimental culture, ceremonies, traditions, standards of dress and bearing transferred wholesale to the new Indian Army. What changed was context. The Rajputs were no longer colonial soldiers fighting imperial wars. They were national troops defending a new republic. Korea was their first test under that identity. The United Nations request for Indian military support arrived in November 1950. India, officially non-aligned and diplomatically cautious, agreed to provide medical units rather than combat troops. The 60th Indian Field Ambulance deployed to Korea in November 1950, followed by the 60th Indian Parachute Field Ambulance in March 1951. Both units operated under United Nations command, treating casualties from all participating nations. The medical personnel were unarmed non-combatants. The Rajput Infantry Company that arrived in March 1951 was different. Official records describe the Rajput deployment as security detachment for medical installations. The reality was more complex. Commonwealth Division Command had identified gaps in defensive coverage along logistics routes and rear area positions. American and British units were stretched across front-line positions. South Korean forces were being rebuilt after catastrophic losses in late 1950. Indian medical units operating in vulnerable rear areas needed protection. The solution was a single reinforced Rajput company, 147 men commanded by Major Dewan Singh. They arrived with Lee Enfield No. 4 rifles, Bren light machine guns, and limited ammunition reserves. Standard Commonwealth infantry equipment circa 1945. The Americans they encountered carried M1 Garands, Browning automatic rifles, and enough ammunition to sustain extended firefights. The contrast was immediate and visible. American platoons moved with 60-pound combat loads. Rajput sections moved with 35-pound loads that included traditional blades as standard equipment. American soldiers wore standardized helmet and uniform systems. Rajput soldiers wore turbans and maintained regimental standards of grooming that included mandatory mustaches for all ranks. Captain Robert Hendricks first encountered the Rajput Company on 18 April 1951 during a logistics coordination meeting at Commonwealth Division Headquarters in Uijeongbu. His initial assessment, recorded in a letter to his wife dated 19 April, was blunt. The Indians are polite, disciplined, and completely out of their depth. They look like they're preparing for a parade, not a war. Their equipment is outdated, their weapons are relics, and they insist on maintaining grooming standards that belong in a peacetime barracks. I give them 2 weeks before they request withdrawal to non-combat duties. Hendricks was not cruel, he was typical. The United States Army in 1951 represented the pinnacle of industrial warfare. American doctrine assumed overwhelming material superiority, more ammunition, more firepower, more mobility, more everything. The standard American infantry division in Korea included 18,804 personnel, 2,012 vehicles, 140 mortars, 54 howitzers, and organic air support. The entire Rajput Company numbered 147 men with 3 jeeps and no artillery. The Americans measured combat power in tons of steel delivered downrange per hour. The Rajputs measured it in training hours per soldier and unit cohesion under stress. The doctrinal gap was fundamental. American infantry tactics in 1951 emphasized fire and maneuver, suppress the enemy with automatic weapons and indirect fire. Advance under that covering fire, close to assault distance, only when enemy resistance has collapsed. Casualties were minimized through firepower. Victory was achieved through material exhaustion of enemy forces. The system worked. It had won the Second World War. It was winning in Korea. Rajput doctrine was different, not inferior, different. The training manuals used by the regiment in 1951 were evolved versions of British Indian Army publications dating to the 1920s. Those manuals explicitly addressed combat scenarios where ammunition resupply was impossible, fire support was unavailable, and numerical superiority belonged to the enemy. The solution was not heroic sacrifice. It was systematic preparation for close-quarters battle. Bayonet training in the Rajput Regiment was not ceremonial. It consumed 6 hours per week of training time. Soldiers practiced thrust, parry, butt stroke, and withdrawal against padded opponents, against multiple opponents, in darkness, under fatigue, and while wearing gas masks. The training was full contact. Injuries were common. The objective was not to teach soldiers how to use a bayonet. It was to make bayonet use automatic under conditions of extreme stress and exhaustion. Close-quarters combat training extended beyond bayonets. The kukuri, the traditional curved blade carried by Rajput and Gorkha soldiers, was practiced as a combat tool. The blade's design, forward-weighted with an inward curve, optimized it for chopping and slashing at close range. Soldiers trained in its use weekly, practicing draws, strikes, and combinations against static and moving targets. The weapon was not symbolic. It was part of the standard combat load, carried in a sheath on the left hip, accessible with either hand. Physical conditioning emphasized sustained exertion under load. Route marches covered 25 kilometers with full equipment. Soldiers trained to function after 36 hours without sleep. Combat drills were rehearsed until they became muscle memory, immediate action drills for ambush, fire and movement under contact, and counterattack procedures that assumed ammunition scarcity. The training was not designed to produce superhuman soldiers. It was designed to produce soldiers who could function when standard assumptions, ammunition availability, fire support, numerical parity, no longer applied. The Americans did not train this way. Bayonet training in the U.S. Army by 1951 had been reduced to basic qualification, a few hours during initial training, rarely practiced thereafter. The doctrine was clear: American soldiers were not expected to fight hand-to-hand. They were expected to kill the enemy at range with overwhelming firepower. The system was logical, effective, and entirely dependent on ammunition resupply. Captain Hendricks spent 2 weeks observing Rajput operations in rear area security. His professional assessment, filed on 20 April 1951, acknowledged their discipline and bearing, but concluded, Indian forces suitable for static defensive roles and population security operations. Not recommended for frontline combat assignments or fluid engagement scenarios. Equipment and doctrine approximately 10 years behind current Commonwealth standards. Cultural emphasis on traditional warrior identity creates potential friction with modern combined arms operations. The report was accurate within its frame of reference. Hendricks was evaluating the Rajputs against American standards, standards that assumed certain operational conditions would always apply. He could not imagine conditions where those assumptions would fail. He could not imagine 18 rounds remaining across an entire position. He could not imagine what would happen when firepower doctrine met its absolute limit and something else was required. The Chinese Spring Offensive began 3 days later. The tactical situation that developed on Hill 4179 was not unique. It was representative. By 22 April 1951, Chinese and North Korean forces had achieved local superiority across multiple sectors of the Commonwealth Division front. The offensive had begun with night infiltration, small units moving through gaps in the defensive line, bypassing strong points, severing communication lines, and attacking logistics nodes. By dawn on 22 April, multiple Commonwealth positions were isolated, encircled, or under sustained assault. Hill 4179 was a minor terrain feature 14 kilometers south of the Imjin River. Height 417.9 meters above sea level, hence the designation. Tactical significance minimal. The hill overlooked a secondary supply route used for medical evacuation and ammunition resupply to forward positions. The Rajput Company had been assigned to Hill 4179 on 18 April as part of rear area security. Their mission: defend the hill and the route it overlooked against infiltration and light attack. Expected threat level: small reconnaissance patrols, possibly company strength probes. Ammunition allocation reflected that assessment: 4,000 rounds of rifle ammunition, 2,400 rounds of Bren gun ammunition, basic load only. Major Diwan Singh established his defensive position using standard British Commonwealth doctrine. The hilltop was too exposed. He positioned his main line 40 meters below the crest on the southern slope, taking advantage of natural defilade and fields of fire covering the likely approach routes. The trench line measured 180 meters across, anchored on both flanks by rocky outcrops that prevented envelopment. 3 Bren gun positions provided interlocking fire. Rifle sections filled the gaps between machine guns. Singh kept a small reserve, 12 men, in a secondary position 30 meters behind the main line. The position was competent, not brilliant, competent. Singh had 147 men to defend 180 meters of frontage. That provided approximately 80 centimeters of trench per soldier, tight but manageable. His main concern was not the position itself, but the isolation. The nearest Commonwealth unit was 6 kilometers west. Radio communication was possible, but unreliable in the valley terrain. If the position came under sustained attack, support would take hours to arrive. The Chinese probing attack began at 0215 hours on 23 April. Not a reconnaissance patrol. A deliberate reconnaissance in force, approximately 150 men advancing in extended line from the western tree line 400 meters from the Rajput position. Singh watched them through binoculars for 3 minutes, allowing them to commit fully to the advance, then ordered controlled fire at 200 meters. The Bren guns opened first, short bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, aimed at visible targets. Then the rifles, independent fire, 1 round per target, no wasted ammunition. The Chinese probe halted at 150 meters, withdrew to the tree line, and disappeared. Duration of engagement, 4 minutes. Ammunition expenditure, approximately 180 rounds. Estimated enemy casualties, 8 to 12. Rajput casualties, none. Singh knew immediately this had not been a raid, it had been reconnaissance. The Chinese were identifying defensive positions, measuring response times, and assessing weapon types. They would return in strength. At 0245 hours, telephone communication with divisional headquarters was severed. Singh sent a runner to the nearest Commonwealth position with a situation report. The runner returned at 0320 hours with information that changed everything. The entire divisional front was under attack, multiple positions were surrounded, ammunition resupply was impossible, and all units were ordered to hold current positions and defend in place. No withdrawal, no reinforcement, hold until the situation stabilized. Singh assembled his officers at 0325 hours. The tactical problem was simple to state, impossible to solve. The Chinese would attack in strength. The Rajput position had perhaps 3,800 rounds remaining, enough for 1 sustained engagement, possibly 2 if fire discipline was perfect. After that, the position would be defenseless. Singh's orders were clear: hold the position. The question was how. Lieutenant Harinder Brar, commanding the reserve section, later described Singh's instructions in a 1952 interview with an Indian Army publication. The major told us we would likely face a major assault before dawn. We would use ammunition sparingly during the initial engagement. If ammunition was exhausted and the enemy continued attacking, we would fix bayonets and counterattack. Not retreat. Counterattack. He said this matter-of-factly, as if describing a standard drill. Because for us, it was. The second Chinese assault arrived at 0335 hours, approximately 600 men advancing in 3 waves across open ground. Singh held fire until the lead wave reached 150 meters, then opened with concentrated fire, all 3 Bren guns, all rifles, controlled but continuous. The effect was devastating. The lead wave took casualties and went to ground at 120 meters. The second wave advanced through them. Singh adjusted fire, focusing the Bren guns on the second wave. At 100 meters, that wave also went to ground. Then, the third wave advanced, and Chinese mortars opened fire from positions in the valley floor, dropping rounds onto the hilltop behind the Rajput position. The trench line took indirect fire for 4 minutes, approximately 40 rounds of 60 mm mortar fire impacting within 50 meters of the position. 2 Rajput soldiers were killed. 7 were wounded. The survivors maintained fire discipline, shooting at identified targets, conserving ammunition. At 80 meters, the Chinese assault began to waver. At 70 meters, it broke. The attacking force withdrew to the tree line, leaving bodies scattered across the open ground. Duration of engagement, 11 minutes. Ammunition expenditure, approximately 1,900 rounds. Estimated enemy casualties, 40 to 60. Rajput casualties, 2 killed, 9 wounded. Singh conducted an immediate ammunition count, remaining approximately 2,400 rounds of rifle ammunition, 800 rounds of Bren ammunition. The mathematics were unforgiving. One more assault of similar scale would exhaust reserves. A larger assault would exhaust them faster, and the Chinese were not finished. The third assault began at 0410 hours. Larger. Approximately 900 men advancing in extended line with covering fire from mortars and light machine guns positioned in the tree line. This was not probing. This was commitment. The Chinese had identified the Rajput position as a priority target and were allocating resources accordingly. Singh adjusted his defensive fire plan. The Bren guns would engage only when targets reached 100 meters. Rifles would hold fire until 80 meters. All fire would be aimed, controlled, and economical. No panic shooting. No wasted rounds. The discipline required was extraordinary. Soldiers watched hundreds of enemy infantry advancing toward them through darkness and mortar fire and did not shoot. They waited. At 100 meters, the Bren guns opened fire. At 80 meters, the rifles joined. The volume of fire from the Rajput position was noticeably thinner than in previous engagements. The Chinese noticed. They kept advancing. At 60 meters, one of the Bren guns jammed. A double feed cleared in 30 seconds, but 30 seconds without fire from that position. At 50 meters, the Chinese were running. At 40 meters, the second Bren gun exhausted its final magazine. Singh ordered rapid fire. Every rifle. Controlled but continuous. Pour fire into the advancing formation. Stop them before they reach the trench. At 35 meters, the Chinese assault was still advancing. At 30 meters, Singh ordered ceasefire. Not because the attack had been stopped, because the ammunition was gone. The remaining rifle ammunition was approximately 18 rounds distributed across the position. 18 bullets. The Chinese advance slowed, sensing the change in fire volume, but did not stop. Distance, 25 meters and closing. The sound across the position was boots on rock, shouted orders in Chinese, and the metallic snap of 47 Lee Enfield rifles having bayonets fixed simultaneously. Singh stood up, fully visible above the trench parapet. He drew his service revolver in his right hand and his kukuri in his left and shouted, "Bajrang Bali ki jai," victory to Hanuman, the monkey god of strength and devotion. Every soldier in the trench repeated the cry. Then they climbed out and charged. Captain Hendricks, observing from Ridge 4203 approximately 400 meters east, later described the moment in a formal statement to 8th Army Intelligence dated 28 April 1951. At 0347 hours, I observed what appeared to be a full assault by Indian forces from their defensive position into an attacking Chinese formation estimated at battalion strength. The Indians advanced at running speed across approximately 20 meters of open ground and engaged the enemy in close combat. I initially believed I was witnessing a final desperate defense before position collapse. That assessment was incorrect. The charge covered 20 meters in approximately 8 seconds. The Rajputs hit the Chinese line at full speed. What followed was not combat in the sense that American or British doctrine understood the term. It was close-quarters slaughter conducted with edged weapons and bayonets against an enemy force that was still operationally intact and numerically overwhelming. Bayonet technique as trained in the Rajput Regiment emphasized speed, targeting, and immediate withdrawal. Thrust to the chest or abdomen. Drive the blade forward with body weight behind it. Twist on extraction to maximize internal damage. Withdraw immediately and move to the next target. Do not become fixed on a single opponent. Keep moving. Stay with your partner. Cover each other. The soldiers executed these techniques exactly as trained. Bayonets were driven into chests, abdomens, and throats. Rifle butts were used as clubs against heads and arms. Kukuris were swung in short, vicious arcs designed to open limbs and sever hands. The Rajputs fought in pairs, exactly as they had trained, one soldier engaging while his partner covered, then reversing roles. They moved through the Chinese formation in a coordinated assault that looked choreographed because it was. It was rehearsed muscle memory executing under maximum stress. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Chinese soldiers at the point of contact attempted to fight back. Some succeeded. Rajput casualties during the charge included 4 men killed in close combat and 6 seriously wounded. But the majority of Chinese soldiers at the front did not fight back. They attempted to retreat into their own formation. The soldiers behind them had watched the Rajputs charge out of the trench, with blades drawn, and assumed they were witnessing a desperate last stand. They were not prepared for disciplined, coordinated close-quarters assault. The Chinese formation compressed inward. Officers attempted to restore order. It was impossible. Panic is contagious. It spreads faster than orders. Soldiers who had survived machine gun fire and artillery were running from men with knives, not because knives are more lethal than bullets, because the method of death matters. A bullet kills at distance. A bayonet kills at touching distance. One is impersonal, the other is intimate. The psychological difference is enormous. The entire Chinese assault force routed within 6 minutes of initial contact. They did not fall back to the tree line. They ran past it, abandoning wounded, weapons, and equipment across 200 meters of open ground. The Rajput assault pursued for approximately 60 meters before Singh recalled them. Not because the enemy was destroyed, because the tactical objective, breaking the assault, had been achieved. Pursuing further risked casualties against an enemy that might rally once distance was re-established. Singh's company returned to the trench line at 353 hours. Total duration of the charge, 6 minutes from climbing out of the trench to return. Rajput casualties during close combat, 11 killed, 19 wounded. Chinese casualties, estimated 240 killed in close combat based on body count, conducted 26 April. Unknown wounded carried away during the retreat. The position remained quiet until 0520 hours. No further Chinese attacks developed. At 0520 hours, an American supply convoy reached the base of Hill 4179 with ammunition resupply, 6,000 rounds of rifle ammunition, 3,000 rounds of Bren ammunition, medical supplies, and rations. The convoy commander, a Lieutenant Morrison, 3rd Infantry Division, climbed to the Rajput position at 0540 hours to coordinate distribution. Morrison's report, filed 23 April, included a single paragraph describing the position, Indian defensive line intact. Estimated 60-80 enemy dead visible in front of position within 50 meters. Additional enemy casualties visible to 200 meters. Indian personnel appeared fatigued but maintained discipline and weapon condition. Ammunition resupply accepted. Position commander reported readiness to continue defensive operations. The report was factual and entirely inadequate. Because what Morrison witnessed was not just a defensive position that had held. It was the physical evidence of doctrinal assumptions being shattered. The bodies in front of the Rajput trench had not been killed by machine gun fire. They had been killed with bayonets. The wounds were distinctive. Morrison was a combat veteran. He knew what bullet wounds looked like. These were not bullet wounds. Singh's company remained on Hill 4179 until 1800 hours on 24 April, when they were relieved by a British infantry company and withdrawn to reserve positions. Total time in combat, 43 hours. Total casualties, 17 killed, 34 wounded, 12 seriously. Total ammunition expended, approximately 5,600 rounds. Estimated enemy casualties across all engagements, 420 killed, unknown wounded. The after-action report filed by Commonwealth Division Headquarters on 27 April described the defense as exemplary conduct, resulting in successful position defense against numerically superior enemy forces. The report noted aggressive counterattack conducted under ammunition scarcity conditions resulted in enemy force disruption and withdrawal. It did not use the word bayonet. It did not describe the charge. The language was clinical, passive, and designed to fit existing doctrinal frameworks. But the soldiers who had witnessed the defense understood what had happened. British officers from the relieving company walked the position on 24 April. They counted bodies. They examined wounds. They spoke with Rajput soldiers. The story spread through Commonwealth Division within 48 hours, not as propaganda, as professional assessment from soldiers evaluating soldiers. Captain Hendricks requested permission to visit Hill 4179 on 25 April. He arrived at 1400 hours with a driver and an interpreter. Major Singh met him at the base of the hill and escorted him to the former defensive position. The trench line was empty. The Rajputs had been withdrawn. But the battlefield remained. Hendricks walked the ground for 90 minutes. He counted 127 bodies still awaiting recovery within 100 meters of the trench line. He examined wounds. He measured distances. He photographed the position with his personal camera, images that were later included in his donated papers at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center. The photographs show bodies clustered in groups of 3 to 5, concentrated in the area between 20 and 40 meters from the trench. The wounds visible in several photographs are not from bullets. At 15:30 hours, Hendricks asked Singh a direct question. The exchange was recorded in Hendricks' personal letter to his wife, dated 26 April 1951, and later in his formal statement to Army intelligence. I asked Major Singh how his men had sustained a bayonet charge into a force that outnumbered them approximately 50 to 1. His answer was 3 sentences. Captain, you train your men to shoot. We train our men to fight. When the shooting stops, the fighting begins. That response crystallized everything Hendricks had witnessed. The Americans had built a military system optimized for material superiority. Overwhelming firepower delivered through industrial logistics. The system was magnificent. It was also conditionally dependent. It required ammunition. It required resupply. It required the assumptions of industrial warfare to remain valid. The Rajputs had built a different system, not technologically advanced, not materially superior, but robust against different failure modes. Their system assumed ammunition scarcity. It assumed isolation. It assumed numerical inferiority. And it provided tactical solutions, trained, rehearsed, institutionalized solutions for those conditions. Neither system was absolutely superior. Both were optimized for specific operational contexts. The Chinese assault on Hill 4179 had created conditions where Rajput doctrine was superior. Absolutely. Decisively. The American doctrine that Hendricks represented had no answer for those conditions. None. When ammunition ran out, American infantry were trained to withdraw or surrender. They were not trained to charge. Hendricks spent another hour observing the position. He noted the trench construction, competent but unremarkable. He noted the fields of fire, adequate but not exceptional. There was nothing about the physical position that explained its successful defense. The explanation was not in the position. It was in the soldiers who had held it. At 16:30 hours, as Hendricks prepared to leave, a Rajput soldier approached him. The man was approximately 25 years old, 170 centimeters tall, wearing a turban and a precisely maintained mustache. He carried something wrapped in canvas. He unwrapped it and handed it to Hendricks without speaking. It was a Chinese officer's pistol, a Tokarev TT-33, 7.62 mm, recovered from the battlefield. The soldier saluted, turned, and walked away before Hendricks could respond. Hendricks kept that pistol for 43 years. When he retired from the army in 1974 as a colonel, he kept it. When he donated his personal papers to the Army Heritage Center in 1994, he included the pistol with a handwritten note, taken from Hill 4179, Korea, 23 April 1951, given to me by a Rajput soldier whose name I never learned and whose language I did not speak. 3 days earlier, I had described his regiment as a medieval fair. He handed me proof that I understood nothing about war. The human cost of Hill 4179 was not abstract. 17 Rajput soldiers were killed. Their names are recorded in the regimental war diary: Naik Bhawani Singh, Lance Naik Gopal Singh, Sepoy Pratap Singh, Sepoy Kishan Singh, Sepoy Arjun Singh, Sepoy Ram Singh, Sepoy Mohan Singh, Sepoy Lakshman Singh, Sepoy Devi Singh, Sepoy Shankar Singh, Sepoy Ganga Singh, Sepoy Bhim Singh, Sepoy Narayan Singh, Sepoy Ratan Singh, Sepoy Kundan Singh, Sepoy Banwar Singh, Sepoy Jai Singh. 17 men, ages ranging from 19 to 34. Farmers' sons, merchants' sons, soldiers' sons, men with families, futures, and names. The charge that broke the Chinese assault was not cost-free heroism. It was necessity paid for in blood by specific individuals whose deaths mattered to specific people. 34 others were wounded, 12 required evacuation to rear area hospitals, 3 were permanently disabled. The Rajput Regiment's casualty list for the entire Korean deployment would eventually total 43 killed and 126 wounded across 14 months of operations. Those numbers represented 11.6% of total personnel deployed, a casualty rate that would be considered catastrophic by American standards but was accepted as operational reality by a regiment with 173 years of institutional memory. Major Singh survived. He returned to India in January 1952, was promoted to lieutenant colonel in 1956, commanded a battalion in the 1962 Sino-Indian War, and retired as a brigadier in 1967. In a 1983 interview with the Center for Armed Forces Historical Research in New Delhi, he was asked if the charge on Hill 4179 had been worth the cost in casualties. His answer, "That question assumes I had a choice. I did not. We had a mission. We had orders. We had training. We executed. 17 men died. That is the cost of successful mission completion under those conditions. It is not for me to say whether that cost was acceptable. It is for me to ensure their deaths achieved the mission objective. They did." That refusal to romanticize, to elevate sacrifice into comfortable mythology, was itself revealing. The Rajput Regiment did not require propaganda. It had operational history. Documented, witnessed, recorded by officers from 3 nations. The charge on Hill 4179 was not legend. It was not heroic myth. It was tactical necessity executed by trained soldiers under conditions their doctrine was designed to address. Captain Hendricks returned to his unit on 26 April and filed a formal addendum to his intelligence assessment dated 20 April. The addendum, preserved in 8th Army records, was 3 paragraphs. Previous assessment of Indian forces as unsuitable for offensive operations is withdrawn. Indian forces demonstrated capability for sustained close-quarters combat under conditions of ammunition scarcity and numerical inferiority that exceeded any comparable U.S. or Commonwealth performance observed in this theater. Recommend immediate reassessment of tactical doctrine assumptions regarding close-quarters battle capability. Current U.S. training and doctrine may be inadequate for scenarios where ammunition resupply is denied and enemy retains assault capability. Indian example suggests alternative approach merit detailed study. The report was filed and acknowledged. It was not acted upon. The United States Army did not revise its tactical doctrine. Bayonet training remained minimal. Close quarters combat training remained cursory. Firepower remained the doctrinal foundation. The American military system had won the Second World War and was winning in Korea through material superiority. The lesson of Hill 4179, that alternative doctrines existed and could succeed under specific conditions, was observed, noted, and archived. The Rajput Regiment received a unit citation from Commonwealth Division Command on 3 May 1951. The citation text, for exceptional gallantry and tactical proficiency demonstrated during defensive operations 23-24 April 1951, successfully defended assigned position against numerically superior enemy forces through disciplined fire control and aggressive counterattack. Unit maintained operational effectiveness and position integrity throughout sustained engagement. Actions reflect highest standards of Commonwealth military professionalism. The citation was accurate. It was also insufficient. Because what happened on Hill 4179 was not exceptional gallantry in the sense of individual heroism transcending normal capability. It was institutional capability expressed under extreme pressure. The Rajputs did exactly what their training, their doctrine, and their regimental culture had prepared them to do for 173 years. The result appeared exceptional only because the observers, American and British officers trained in different doctrinal traditions, assumed such results were no longer achievable in modern industrial warfare. The contrast that defines military analysis, technology versus tradition, firepower versus manpower, material versus morale, was not resolved on Hill 4179. It was complicated. The Rajputs did not prove that traditional warrior culture was superior to modern combined arms doctrine. They proved that doctrine is context-dependent. That capability is multidimensional. That training depth can compensate for equipment gaps under specific conditions. That psychological weapons, shock, fear, moral collapse, remain operational even when kinetic weapons are exhausted. The phrase medieval fare disappeared from American military communication after April 1951. Not because it was officially prohibited, because it had been empirically disproven. The mustaches were not costume. The blades were not props. The battle cries were not theater. They were components of a coherent fighting system that functioned when the assumptions of industrial warfare failed. The last documented assessment came from Major Peter Young, Gloucestershire Regiment, who observed the Rajput position during relief operations on 25 April. His diary entry, published in the Regimental History in the Highest Traditions in 1978, stated, "The Rajputs held their ground through skill, discipline, and controlled violence that I have seldom witnessed in 20 years of military service. They are not romantics playing at warriors. They are professionals who understand something fundamental that we have perhaps forgotten in our enthusiasm for technology. Wars are ultimately decided by men willing to close with the enemy and destroy him at arm's length. Our technology allows us to avoid that reality most of the time. The Rajputs have built a system that functions when avoidance is no longer possible. That is not primitive. That is profoundly professional." The institutional legacy of Hill 4179 was minimal in American and British military education. The engagement received brief mention in Commonwealth Division histories. It was not studied at staff colleges. It did not influence doctrine development. The American military continued its trajectory toward greater technological sophistication, greater firepower, and greater dependency on industrial logistics. That trajectory produced victories in every subsequent conflict where American material advantages applied. It also produced vulnerabilities in conflicts where those advantages were neutralized or irrelevant. For the Rajput Regiment, Hill 4179 became regimental history, not mythology, history. The engagement was studied by officer candidates. The tactical decisions were analyzed. The casualties were memorialized. The lesson was institutionalized. Aggressive action under conditions of material disadvantage can succeed if training is sufficient and execution is disciplined. That lesson, derived from 173 years of operational experience, remained valid. 18 rounds remaining. That number, returned to now at the end, carries layered meaning. It was not simply a measure of desperation. It was the point where one type of capability reached its limit and another type became necessary. The Americans would have requested fire support that could not arrive. They would have withdrawn to positions that did not exist. They would have surrendered or died in place. Not because American soldiers lacked courage, because American doctrine provided no trained response to those specific conditions, the Rajputs charged. Not because they were braver, because their doctrine, their training, and their institutional culture provided a trained response. The charge was not improvisation. It was execution of rehearsed procedure under stress. The result, tactical victory against overwhelming numerical odds, validated the doctrine but did not prove its universal superiority. It proved its contextual effectiveness. Military capability is not absolute, it is conditional. Optimized for specific scenarios, vulnerable in others. The Americans built a system for industrial warfare where logistics worked, ammunition arrived, and firepower decided outcomes. The Rajputs maintained a system for warfare where those assumptions might fail and something else would be required. Both systems were professional, both were rational, both succeeded in their designed contexts. Hill 4179 was the collision point where contexts intersected, where American assumptions failed, where Rajput doctrine applied. The outcome was not predetermined. The Rajputs could have failed. 17 men died, proving they did not. That cost, specific, individual, irreducible, was the price of demonstrating that alternative doctrines remained viable in an age that had declared them obsolete. You can spend $42,000 per soldier on night vision systems, ballistic protection, and integrated communications. You can deliver 15,000 rounds per minute from rotary wing platforms. You can surveil entire valleys with thermal imaging and real-time satellite coverage. You can maintain supply chains that move 400 tons of ammunition per day to forward positions. And when those systems fail at 0347 hours on a hillside in Korea, when the bullets run out and the enemy keeps coming, none of it matters. What matters is whether your soldiers know how to fix bayonets in darkness and mean it, whether they have trained for that moment until it becomes automatic, whether they belong to an institution that has thought seriously about what happens when technology fails and warfare returns to its most fundamental form. Disciplined men with edged weapons, deciding who lives and who controls the ground. The Rajputs proved something inconvenient to modern military establishments, that doctrine without depth is just equipment lists, that firepower without will is just noise. That tradition, when institutionalized into training rather than ceremony, remains operational capability, not medieval, not obsolete, not romantic, modern, professional, lethal. The charge on Hill 4179 was not the last time in human history that bayonets would be fixed in combat. It was not the last time training would matter more than technology. It was not the last time 47 men would face 2,400 and win. It was just the last time anyone called them a medieval fair.